Hey everybody, Tim Adams here again with you, and today we're going to be talking about how do we route video signals around our facility, and we might even delve into some live streaming as well. How do we get a video signal from our facility out to the audience that wants to see it? So first we're going to start off with a regular participant here with us, Charles, and he's going to talk to us about how he used to route signals around his facility versus how he does it now. So Charles, why don't you give us a rundown of how you used to do it?
Yeah, so how we used to do it, granted, we're a small church, probably have a seating capacity in our main sanctuary for like 80, and we've had a couple opportunities to have overflow into our fellowship hall. So what we used to do before we had internet access to the church or anything like that is we actually ran a Cat5 cable in the attic from the sound booth back to the fellowship hall and used what's called a balun or a balun. People pronounce them different, kind of like tomato versus tomato. Anyway, but you can buy these devices to convert numerous different types of audio and video. In our case, we ran sound out of our soundboard into the little red and white audio connections, and then from a camcorder, your old composite yellow video, into a balun. The Cat5 cable converts it, sends it over to the fellowship hall, and then on the other end you've got another balun or balun that would down convert it, which we would then hook up to another sound system or and a projector. And it worked pretty good for that point in time. Now, getting a little technical here, there's such a thing as a active versus a passive balun. And if I remember correctly, Tim may correct me if I get the terminology backwards here, but the passive ones are what we had. Just a little black box, your audio and video in one end, Cat5 out the other. An active balun is used for going greater distances and usually requires power to help boost the signal. But ours, short enough distance to the fellowship hall, only needed passive baluns. So that's what we used to do. However, times have changed. We now have internet access at the church. We live stream our services. So the thought occurred to us, well, since we're live streaming our services for the public, and if we need overflow in, say, our youth room or our fellowship hall, live streaming does have like a 30-second delay, if you will. So whatever you're broadcasting live, if you're watching the live stream, it's about 30 seconds behind. So as long as your other room is far enough away that you don't hear the main sanctuary and what you're hearing on the live stream, you're good. Otherwise, it can sound like a weird echo effect. But we went to the path, and we actually used it here in the last month, where we actually set up 2 TVs, one in our youth room, which is actually permanently mounted in our youth room, with a Roku attached. And it was the actual Roku box, physical box, which I could get into the differences on Roku boxes, but that's digressing into a whole other conversation. We use that in the youth room, whereas in the fellowship hall / kitchen, somebody just brought their 32-inch TV from the house with one of these little Roku sticks, not the box, the stick, where it just looked like you had a TV set up there. That's all it looked like you had, was just a TV set up. But in the back was a little Roku stick, and the people preparing the food in the kitchen could watch the live stream as well. Now, pluses and minuses between our old method of using baluns versus the new method, and thank you, Tim, for putting the visuals up there with what the Roku sticks looks like. Pluses and minuses on using baluns versus a live streaming setup. Baluns, the pluses, rock solid, hardwired connection, works great. Downside, you got to pull cable through your attic, which in Texas doesn't really happen in the summer. You want to do it in the winter, or else you fry. So that's the thing with the baluns. The live streaming setup, the plus means you can set it anywhere up in your church as long as you got a Wi-Fi connection. It's very flexible. Downside is you can overcome your internet connection. And what I mean by that is this, and this is going to be hard to describe without a visual. When you're live streaming your website, you're using the upload speed on your internet connection. So, most internet providers, the upload speed is slower than the download. Like in the case of our church, we have 50 meg down, 8 meg up. Well, out of that 8 meg up, our live stream, since we're only streaming an SD right now, is using about 1 meg, 1 out of 8. And that gives you plenty of headroom for other people in the church if they've got wireless devices and they're surfing the internet, Facebook, Twitter, even though they probably shouldn't during the sermon. But you've got the headroom to support that with the upload speed. However, with the download speed, it sounds like 50 meg is enough, right? Well, you start setting up these TVs in various locations. Each one of those watching the live stream is going to use 1 meg coming back down. So even though you got 1 meg going up to the internet to your streaming provider, each TV that you have set up watching the live stream is going to be pulling download speed. So in this case, you've got, we had 2 TVs, so that was only using 2 out of 50 meg. But if you've got a large church with a lot of people with a lot of mobile devices, and you pair that up with a bunch of TVs that are trying to use for overflow, you could overcome your bandwidth really quick. So that's the caution with doing the live stream setup like we've got. And if it comes down to it in our situation, I've got the capability where I can lock everybody out of the Wi-Fi so that I don't have to worry about anybody else's device tying up our bandwidth and keeping it only for the church devices. So if you're going to do an overflow situation using a Roku or something, you might end up in a situation where you make people upset because they're like, well, we can't get our devices online. Well, what's your priority that day? People getting their individual devices online, or is it making sure your overflow is reliable? Anyway, hopefully that was succinct enough and not overly technical, Tim.
That was great, man. Loved it. And I tried to keep up with you. I didn't think ahead to get the Roku stuff pulled up. So I was a little lagging on that, but hopefully people got the idea. So you bring up a lot of good points, and I think that was a short but detailed enough explanation of kind of the pros and cons of doing it either way. The traditional way of doing of routing signals around is actually, at least on a budget, is using those balins that you were talking about. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up kind of a close-up of what a traditional balun looks like. You've got your RJ45, your Cat5 or your Cat6 connection here. This is a powered or an active balun. And then the other side, you've got your HDMI input or output, depending on whether it's a receiver or a transmitter. We have seen these come down in price significantly over the last year or so. And be aware that there's also something out there called HD-base-T. And that is a standard of not only sending, say, an HDMI signal over Cat5e or Cat6 cabling, but it's also infrared, serial commands. So it carries multiple signals. And it also allows you to power the receiver from the power that is plugged in at the transmitter, which is really cool. It makes install a lot easier and cheaper because you don't necessarily have to have power on the receiving end. I mean, obviously, whatever your display is going to be needs power, but you don't necessarily need to plug in power for this guy. These are good to about, I think the furthest one I've seen is about 220 feet or so. And that's going to probably do for most of you out there. However, if you're on a large piece of property and you've got a couple different facilities, or maybe you've got multiple buildings on your property that you need to route signals through or between, you're going to be looking at something utilizing fiber optic. And this is one of the more inexpensive ones that I have seen. And fiber as well has also dropped in price significantly. You may kind of gasp and get sticker shock over at this, but look at how far you can send it. You can send it 1,600 feet, which is ridiculous, if you ask me. Um, the other consideration is that fiber optic cable is more expensive than Cat 5, Cat 6 cable. Um, and there's a reason for that. It's because you can send more bandwidth down that line. So those are kind of the long haul transport methods that are available to you. I have seen HDMI cables that are as long as 100 feet. I've heard mixed reviews on how well they function long term, but those are available. And assuming that the output that you're plugging that cable into is sending enough juice, if you will, it's amplifying that signal enough to go down that 100 foot, then you should be fine. But anytime you're sending signal, be it audio or video, the longer you're sending it down, say, an HDMI cable, the thicker that cable should be, because the signal loss over those longer distances is pretty significant. So those are a couple options. I'm not necessarily promoting or condoning one brand over another. This is really just what came up on B&H when I did a quick search. There's, I don't know, dozens of manufacturers out there that are making balins. The other thing that we want to talk about, and I'll turn that off here, is let's say you've got multiple inputs and you've got multiple outputs. So you need, you'd say you got a satellite receiver, you've got a Blu-ray player, you've got a Roku, you've got a computer, and you want to be able to route those signals separately to different outputs. Let's say you've got two projection screens, you've got an LCD monitor up on the stage, we call that a fullback monitor. Or maybe you have a projector that's projecting lyrics for the worship team and slides for the speakers. Let's say you've got overflow rooms, you've got TVs located around your facility that you want to be able to send different content to at different times. That gets a lot more complex, and it can get really brain numbing to try and figure out how you're going to send this signal to this display device. And what you're looking at there is what we call a matrix switcher. And I'll pull one of those up while I'm talking about it. But at the very base definition of what it is, it allows you to take any input and send it to any output, independent of any other input going to any other output. It's a brilliant piece of technology that that exists, and it is available. Now, keep in mind that the larger the matrix, the more expensive it's going to be. So, for example, I'll pull up this device, the Atlona. This is a 16 by 16. Yes, it's been discontinued, but this will give us an idea of what we're looking at. So you've got 16 inputs, okay, and this particular model allows you to also route audio and infrared control signals independently, or as in addition to the HDMI. And then if we go over to the right side here, we've got all of our 16 outputs. Or I'm sorry. Where are we going? Oh, okay, that's what we're doing. So you've got HDMI in, and then they're sending it out over Cat 5 or Cat 6, whatever cabling topology you're using. So essentially, this is a hybrid. So your outputs would actually be going to receiver balins. So remember what we were looking at over here. It would go to one of these. But it would take the place of the transmitter, if that makes sense. So let me pull that back up here. So this is a really nice thing. We'll look at the front here. Okay, so you've got all of your inputs, and then you can choose via, I'm assuming there's a computer interface here, how you route all of your inputs. You can send input 1 to all 16 outputs. You can send inputs 1 through 4 to outputs 1 through 4. I mean, it's really up to you how you choose to do it. And this is a really powerful way to route video in a very compact form factor. And you know, the fact that we have HDMI, which has audio and video, that just, you know, makes it even more powerful. So Charles is with us. Hi, Charles. He's got to get his mic unmuted. You can just wave. So
I must have double tapped the mute. Sorry.
yeah, oh, I'm sorry. Paul is with us. I always get you two mixed up. I'm so sorry. Paul, welcome.
We look so much alike. By the way, how's my audio? I've been playing with it.
You're good.
Good, I'll take
You
it.
are good. So, Paul, I'm wondering if you could maybe give us an overview of how does your church use video, and maybe give us a kind of a overview of you know, where do you send video within your facility?
Yeah, so we have different video signals that we send to different locations. There's the IMAG feed, IMAG image magnification, and that's when you put live video up on a screen to make it larger to eliminate bad seats. So we send that to 2 side screens. Then we've got a center screen that only plays video or lyrics during worship. The lyrics also go over the iMag, so that's a totally different feed. Then we've got another video feed that goes into the lobby that, depending on what time of service it is, it can be different. And our iMag feed is typically the same one that we repurpose for our live stream. So that's probably, let's see, 1, 2, 3 distinct video feeds. And I would actually, we've just done some rearranging. We have a separate MLE on our switcher. It's a 2 MLE switcher. So we have the ability to switch the live stream feed slightly differently. I would like to send the iMag feed out to MLE2 and then cut in some shots that are better for the live stream, like wider shots and also reaction shots that you wouldn't necessarily want to put up in the sanctuary itself. So those are the different video feeds that we have. 3 right now. I'm hoping for 4, and what they all do.
Awesome, thanks. So I've gone ahead and picked up an image here that more or less describes what you were describing to us. So iMag would be the 2 outside screens, and then the lyrics would be in the middle. And forgive me if it's not exactly how you guys use it, but
very similar.
Okay. Good. So for those of you that aren't familiar with how a video switcher works, maybe, Paul, you could kind of give them a breakdown of what an MLE is.
Yeah, so introductory video switchers have 1 output, basically. So you can bring 4 or 8 different video signals in, switch between them, that's why it's called a video switcher, and then send that out 1 output. But if you think of an output not as just the entire switcher, but you think, well, what if I had everything duplicated into another set? That's what an MLE is. So in the case of our switcher, which I'm blanking on what brand it is, we have 2 MLEs. So I could basically, sitting in front of me, I have 2 sets of buses. I have the preview bus, which is what's coming up next. I have the program bus, what's up right now, and then I have a mix effects bus. Then, so that's 3. I've got 2 sets of those. So I could potentially take the output of MLE1 and route that into the input of MLE2, and then anytime I wanted to, I could reach up 3 or 4 inches higher than I normally press the buttons and add in a different shot instead of what's on the iMag screens, for example. So that gives us a lot of flexibility. So the video feed, if we were to do this for the live stream, would be mostly the same, with occasions where you wouldn't want to show a shot of someone who's in the congregation up on the big screens. It's very distracting. Even people that know not to look at themselves try to sneakily look at themselves. And so you get this deal where their eyes dart to the side, and then they're pretending that they're not looking, but they're looking, and it's really obvious. But if we just put, like if the pastor was talking about someone's testimony and that person was in the congregation, we could take a shot of that person, and that person would never know that they are out on the live stream. So they wouldn't be trying not to look and failing miserably at trying not to look. They would just think, oh, I guess they decided not to use that camera. So that's one of the good applications for it.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. That was wonderful. Hopefully everybody was able to kind of keep track of me pointing out what he was talking about on the image that I put up there. Oh man, it's unfortunate that you don't remember the brand and model of switcher you have, because I could probably pull it up. But
I don't think it's a Ross Vision, but I could be wrong. I would probably know it if I saw the control surface, but
right. Yeah, I hear you. Well, a video switch. I mean, we could have a whole hangout dedicated to video switchers, honestly, because what I was talking about as far as the matrix switcher, production switcher, video switcher. I mean, it is so far beyond what a matrix switcher is that it's in its own class, honestly. But essentially, if you've got multiple cameras, multiple inputs, you're going to need some way of switching between those inputs. Whether you're live streaming, whether you're just going to recording, or whether you're sending signal live out to a screen somewhere else in the facility, you're going to need some way of mixing that or switching between those. And there are, a plethora of devices on the market that will let you do that. But as we talk about often in these Hangouts, if you're going to make a purchase, make sure it's foundational and it's something that you can build on in the future. So if you are wanting to start a video ministry sometime in the future, and you have the budget or the opportunity to get a video switcher, I would encourage you to do so. If your vision or the leadership's vision for your church is only ever to have one camera, and maybe you're mixing the computer, the slides in for the message, we could probably get around that a little bit. Although some of the new production switcher products on the market are so inexpensive by comparison to what the price points used to be, that it doesn't really gain you anything not to get one. So, Charles, could you help me out here? I'm not actually able to pull up that question that you're referencing. Could you tell me what that question was, or maybe address that for me?
Yeah, so Betty made a comment saying each TV with a download, even if it is through a matrix like we have. I think she might have got a little lost as far as my description of using a Balun versus the internet setup, and the size of my church. Everything that I was doing is point to point, not point to multi-point. So therefore, a matrix switcher is not involved in my situation. So I think what she's wondering is does a matrix switcher provide any benefit if you're going to do the internet streaming option? And in my opinion, it doesn't. You know, if you're not using a matrix switcher in the sense that you're switching camera feeds or something that leads into your live stream, if all you care about is distribution to your endpoints, yeah, you don't need a matrix switcher with the live switching or live streaming solution I was talking about.
Right. The only situation that I could see that becoming a better solution than how you're doing it, Charles, is when the number of destinations gets to the point where you're going to overload your bandwidth.
Exactly. And like I say, in a small church like mine, 50 meg down, and each endpoint is using 1 meg out of 50 meg. As long as, you know, everybody else in your church isn't sitting there streaming the video on their mobile device, you're okay. And that goes back into where I was talking about network management. If you're going to do the internet-based solution, you need to make sure that you're controlling the network as much as possible. It does not need to be a public network.
Absolutely not. Being more or less familiar with Betty's setup, there are a number of TVs in her particular facility. I would venture to say that the matrix switcher would be the way to go in her particular situation, just because of the number of outputs. They're not gaining anything by doing a live streaming solution, but they are definitely standing to lose quite a bit just in terms of image quality by trying to utilize a similar system that you deployed, Charles. So hopefully that answers her question. I'll try and keep a better eye on the chat. That just kind of popped up on me because I was off the page. But let's just check in with everybody. We've got Juan down in Santo Domingo. He's listening in. That's in Dominican Republic, by the way, so this is an international hangout tonight, which is awesome. So, Juan, let me ask you, do you have any questions? Is everything making sense? Kind of give us some feedback here.
Oh, sorry, guys.
That's okay.
Yeah, everything is very clear. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I understood everything.
Perfect. So, Paul, I'm going to go back to you and have you kind of talk us through. Are you guys planning on expanding your video system at all? Are you looking at any upgrades? Maybe you're adding some screens, anything like that?
Probably not for a while. We were growing like gangbusters for a really long time, and then we kind of leveled out. And then we had a situation with a pastor and all that caused some shrinkage in our church. So without getting into that, probably not going to be doing a lot of expansion very soon, but I think that we'll have I would like to see us do better distribution, because there's some unofficial video signal distribution that goes on, and I think we have the ability to do it better, so I'd prefer that we didn't do that. Like my wife, she teaches the 3s, 4s, and 5-year-olds, so occasionally she'll be curious, okay, well, is the service over yet? How close are we getting? Should I keep going longer? Should I signal the teacher that's up on stage and I'm, kind of in charge and giving them hand signals or whatever? Should I tell them to keep going a little bit longer, or should I tell them to wrap it up? So she'll just pull up her iPad and watch the live stream. Well, there's going to be a certain degree of latency, not a huge amount, but it just seems like we could run a wire there. That would not be hard at all. We have TVs. We could have that going at all times in all the places where someone would need it, and then we would have a basically real-time signal as opposed to, yeah, it's 30 seconds off or it's 2 minutes off, and by the time you notice the church is over, the first set of parents have already arrived because they're really worried about little Johnny, who actually doesn't want to go home because he's having such a blast. But that's what I'd like to see us do, is more of doing it the right way and less of doing it I'll just use my iPad or my phone or whatever kind of distribution that we see a lot of people do just because they know they can.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. Let me set up another screen share here, and let me just run you through our brand new video system at my church. Now, we're a mobile church, and so we don't have the luxury, and yes, it is a luxury, of having a building where we can just leave things plugged in and set up and that kind of thing. So we needed something that was easy to use, fairly bulletproof, and easy to set up. So I'll run you through pretty much everything on this diagram is brand new. And this was not the original system that I spec'd out, but we had to make a couple changes because this is all HDMI switching. And if you know anything about HDMI, you know that HDCP can come along with it, which is a content protection protocol that really is more of a headache than anything. But be that as it may, if you are using a Mac of any flavor and you're coming from the HDMI output of that, just know that HDCP is full-time on out of that output. That's bitten me in the rear end more than once. And it bit me again in this in this particular case. So the easy way to read this diagram is the left side are sources and the right side are outputs and displays. So just walking you through this, the MacBook Pro has two outputs. We have the HDMI output that goes into our distribution amplifier. This particular distribution amplifier, which I'm happy to provide the link to, actually strips the HDCP protocol out of the HDMI signal, which is awesome. So one of the this is a 1x2, so we have one input and two outputs. One of the outputs goes into a Cat5 HDMI balun, which then goes to a receiver balun, which plugs into our projector. We have a rear projection set up on a portable screen. The other output goes into our video switcher, which this is a relatively new product on the market. It's got 4 inputs. They're all HDMI, and it's got one HDMI output with a preview, which we'll get into. The other output from the MacBook Pro is utilizing a USB adapter that you can get pretty much anywhere. It's by a company called NewerTech. We convert it to HDMI. It'll do VGA, DVI, and HDMI, so it's a very utilitarian adapter to have. On a Mac, I don't know about Windows, but on the Mac you do have to download drivers to get it to recognize. But then we go into another balun that sends it to our stage display TV. And because we're finally using ProPresenter instead of Keynote, we actually have a dedicated stage display instead of just a full screen version, representation of the slide like what you see on the projector. So we can see notes and we can send messages. They've got timers and a clock and blah blah blah. Lots of good stuff on that screen. The second input to the switcher is from our camera. This is brand new. This is the Vixia HFG30. I think it's about I forget how much it is, but it's a beautiful camera. And I know in a conversation that we've been having, or discussion in the church tech community, Charles, you were mentioning the Vixia line to the original poster in that discussion, and I can tell you that this thing puts out a beautiful image. So that comes in HDMI, and then we've got two outputs that come out of that switcher. We've got an HDMI that goes to our Matrox Monarch HD recorder. This also is a live stream device, so it will live stream. So this is a foundational purchase for us. We'll be able to use this to stream in the future when we do actually get into a space where that becomes a realistic possibility for us. But for now, we're just using it as a recorder. It's got two USB ports on the front and an SD card slot, so you can record to any of those. Unfortunately, Matrox does limit you to either FAT32 or NTFS file structures on your recording media. So obviously you want NTFS because then you don't have file size limits, which can really bite you in the rear end. So like for instance, the SD card we had, I could only format it as FAT32 on my Mac. And so we ended up with like 8 files the first week. So I had to drop those into Final Cut and put them all together. So the other HDMI output. So this first recorded HDMI output is actually the program out. So this is recording whatever it is that we're sending from the switcher on the program output. The preview output gives us a multi-view, so we can see all 4 inputs. So we only have 2 inputs, so we see those on this TV. This was also a brand new purchase for us. The one really unique thing about this switcher at this price point, this is under $1,000, is that it has analog audio input and output. Now, obviously, you can bring in sound over the HDMI. It's got a digital audio mixer on board that allows you to do that, to actually mix your audio to a certain degree. But we just, come the tape output from our PreSonus mixer here goes straight in. It's just a left-right RCA connection, and then that puts sound and video together out over this program HDMI. Other than that, we just have the wireless router, which a friend of mine donated to us. That's going to allow me to control the digital mixer remotely using the app once I get this wireless router configured properly. And then the other Cat5 goes to the Matrox Monarch recorder, which allows me to connect to the router with my computer and configure it, and I can control it through a web interface as well. So this is our video system in a nutshell, and I think all of this put us back about $3,500-ish. So that's not bad for a video system, honestly. I mean, Paul, you're nodding. Give me a ballpark of what a system like this, back in the day, say 5 years ago, what do you think that would have set us back?
5 years ago, let's see here. You're looking at, well, 2, 4, because all that is HD, and 5 years ago HD was much more cutting edge than it is now. Now it's kind of table stakes, if you'll pardon the gambling
Right.
analogy. So I'm thinking that you're 5 years ago, easily $10,000.
Right.
Now, some of those pieces weren't available, but to get the same capability, you'd have to go
Right.
with something much more pricey. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the switcher alone, you're going to be looking at a minimum investment of around $3,000 to $4,000. And that's me assuming that the Panasonic HS50 was around 5 years ago. I don't think it was, because I think that came out about 3.5 years ago, but I could be wrong. Anyway, so that is our system. On paper, it looks fairly complex. It is a bit of a spaghetti mess with the cables. Just how we have it all arranged and packaged and all that, but it does work. We had a little bit of an issue this past weekend. It was week 3 well, week 2 really of deploying this, and I couldn't get an image to the projector. And turns out that I had the wrong power supply plugged into the transmitter balun for the projector. So, anytime you deploy new equipment, there's going to be a bit of a learning curve. But once you kind of wrap your head around all this, it's an awesome system, and we went from an image quality that was pretty bad. It was pretty atrocious to something that actually I'm proud of and I'm happy with and I'm satisfied with. So, all the pastors are happy with what we had to deliver. And this particular weekend, we forgot to plug in the audio cable, so we didn't get any audio. But hey, you know what? Growing pains. That just means that we're going to remember to do that in the future. So, but this is also where we can talk about processes and the importance of having a checklist for your people to go through. But as far as starting to wrap this up, we're a little short of where I wanted to be. But I mean, what are some other things that we could talk about as far as routing video signals? Do we want to talk about EDID? Do we want to talk about maybe finding what that best common resolution should be? Because I think that's a consideration that needs to be talked about.
Well, I've got a question based on some of your past experience, Tim, and some of the stuff that we've talked about in the past. I'm curious as to why you didn't go with SDI, why you went with Cat5e baluns instead.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that up. I forgot to talk about that as one of the methods of being able to route and send signal over long distance. What Paul is referring to is taking, say, an HDMI signal and converting it into a serial digital interface, or an SDI, HD SDI. It's a very robust and stable platform, and one of the primary reasons that we didn't go that route is because we already had the Cat5 cabling. That was number one. So our old system was VGA based, and so we were routing and sending VGA signals to the front TV and to the projector. So I already had the Cat5 cable. That was one consideration. The second consideration was cost. Those SDI converters do tend to cost more now than the balun systems do. And like I said, a large part of that is because those balun systems have dropped in price significantly over the last, even the last 6 months. It used to be that the SDI and the balun systems were pretty equivalent. You were looking about $250 to $300 per system, or per converter. And now, you're able to get a HDMI balun system for, I think the comprehensive system we got was a little over $100, which, yeah, that's pretty impressive. Considering I can send infrared as well as power. Well, no, I can't send power. Both ends have to be powered, which is a bit strange, but I think it's because it's not utilizing the HD-based-T standard. So that's unfortunate. I think the HD-based-T is still around 150 to 250 per system. And you're getting more capability, more value for that. So that makes sense. I'm not going to complain about that. But for what we need, we're getting 164 feet of transmit distance, which is pretty darn good for a 1080p signal with audio. I don't know if it has 3D deep support, but we don't need that, so who cares? But we're at a standard resolution of 1080i for the computer recording into the switcher, or per presenter output is 1080p, and then the front TV is 720. And that's the advantage of being able to have separate outputs for those two, is I can set those resolutions in the display preferences separately, which is awesome. Once we figured all that out, it works great. The other issue that I have with converting to SDI is that if you're looking at doing that in an IMAG situation, then we have to start talking about latency. And because anytime you convert a signal back and forth, you're introducing latency or delay. And in an IMAG situation, if I'm a speaker and I raise my hands like this, and it takes more than 4 milliseconds, would you say, Paul?
Yeah, about that.
Okay, so anything more than 4 milliseconds, there's going to be a noticeable delay on the screens. And that delay, you have to add up. Okay, so the camera is sending the signal to the switcher. Is the switcher having to scale that video signal to a different resolution? Is it a 720p camera and we're scaling everything to 1080p? That's going to add some latency. And then are we doing any effects, or are we changing that video signal anywhere in the switcher besides, say, scaling? So if you're not scaling, Paul, help me out here. What are some other things that can add delay in a switcher? I mean, we're talking like digital video effects, which please never use.
Well, it depends on what digital video effect. I mean, technically putting a lower third is an effect, and that I wouldn't call that bad, but
No.
when you make it look like a bad 1980s music video, which sometimes you should never play with the capabilities of a switcher where someone that can make you use them can see, because they will go, oh, that's cool, we ought to do that. No, we should not. So, but back to your question, yeah, anytime you do anything to the video signal, it could potentially, depending on the system, cause latency. So,
right. Well, and then we have, it's not so big of a problem with digital cabling like SDI, but cable length can also be a factor. So because a signal does take a certain amount of time to traverse a certain amount of distance. So the bottom line here is, if you're doing IMAG, if you're putting live video on screens for everybody to see, then you want to reduce the latency as much as possible. And what that means is you have to think about every step in that signal chain. That's the bottom line. Because the last thing you want to do is get into a situation where your IMAG is consistently behind the live action, because that's going to be noticeable, it's going to be annoying, and it's going to, for those of us that know what we're doing and know what we're talking about, if we come and visit your church and we see that, we know that something was not implemented or integrated properly. And for somebody like me, I'm going to be paying more attention to that and trying to figure out in my head why it's not functioning the way that it's supposed to, rather than paying attention to the message. And that's never a situation you want to find yourself in. Am I missing anything on that, Paul?
I don't think so, but I want to agree with you totally on that. That we used to have a member of our church staff who grew up in a large church in Atlanta that had a television ministry in the 80s, and she hadn't touched video for 20 years, 25 years, and we had a switcher that it was mostly SD, but it had an HD bus, and so we were trying to do everything in HD, and in order to do that, we had to convert our cameras from regular analog composite, this was when we were SD, to SDI, and that conversion added 4 or 5 frames to the time, and she noticed. So you never know when someone important to decision making is going to notice that, and they're going to be not just a little bugged. I mean, those of us that have eyes to see video, we get really bugged by things. Today we had a new director, and I knew almost immediately that it was the new guy that was directing because of his style. We just notice these things. So if there's any chance at all, and there's any way to get around it, avoid the latency. Don't use ProPresenter as a video switcher. That'll add latency. Don't add in additional conversions up and down. That'll add latency. Don't add video effects you don't need just because someone said they were cool when they used to be 30 years ago, but not so much anymore. That would add video latency. Just avoid that, because at its worst, it can make your pastor look like a bad kung fu movie from the 70s, because it could get out of sync just that much, just enough to where the lips don't quite match, and you get to a threshold where it's not a few people that notice, it's everyone, and then it gets really annoying because no one's paying attention.
Exactly. And if nobody's paying attention, then essentially what's happening, tech is calling attention to itself instead of being transparent and invisible. And then people are checked out. They're not connecting with the message. And believe me, pastors and speakers that do this for a living, they can tell when an audience is checked out. And what that means is that now they're focused on, why is the audience checked out? They're not listening. I'm not able to connect with them. What's going on? Now they're distracted. I mean, it's a domino effect. So when it comes to doing IMAG, don't cut corners. Just don't do it. You know, if you're not going to do it right, then don't do it. That may seem a little harsh. That may seem cold, but that's just the reality. Because if you're going to do something half-cocked, it's not worth doing. Because ultimately, that's going to come back and bite you in the rear end. And depending on how big of a shortcut you're taking, or how big of a cost savings you're trying to implement, the severity of that bite is going to vary. So take it from those of us who've been in the trenches for a long time. We won't get into specifics, but learn from our mistakes. Take what we're telling you. We're trying to help, believe it or not. We're not trying to say you have to spend a lot of money in order to do this right. There are ways to do it more inexpensively, but you really have to know what you're doing. And you have to understand the compromises that you're going to be making, and in order to get the functionality that you want. So if that scares you, if it makes you nervous, if it makes you feel like you're outside your comfort zone, then contact Paul, contact Charles, contact myself. There are those of us around that would love to help you out, talk you through it, give you some pointers, give you questions that you need to ask your leadership and your team. So we are here to help. We really are. So with that, I think that pretty much will cover this first foray into how do we route video signals around our facility. Paul, Charles, do you have anything else, any questions, any comments? Nope, I'm getting head shakes. Okay. Well, for that, I want to thank you for watching, and as always, if you have any comments, please put them below, and I will do my best to get back to you quickly. And if you want to talk with any of us on a regular basis, we're in the Church Tech community on Google+, and you can also find a couple of us in Adventist Church Tech, Church Mag, and what's the other one? Tech Applied. That's the. So any of those groups, you'll find me. But if you want the largest audience to bounce ideas off of, to comment with, just to, talk shop, then find us on Church Tech. Once again, thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.